So thanks everybody for coming on back. Thanks for your attention on non-digital attention for the next 50 minutes. So as I mentioned, we are talking in this class, right, and you reflected nicely about that there are ideas of a community, there's ideas of community development. I've talked about the field of community development, but it's really, really important for you to see people and hear people, engage with people who actually are doing community development, not just professors professing about community development. So I've invited an all-star group of alumna from a number of years of the program to talk about their work and share their kind of experience in the program and since as they've moved on in their careers. So I'll just introduce them here. I had alphabetical on here, but we'll do it from left to right. So directly on my left is Amar, who is with, for many years was with the Strategic Growth Council, but now is with, many years with Caltrans and now with the Strategic Growth Council. We have Allie, Larman, who is the most recent graduate, and now is with the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, but it has a new name, right? Climate Innovation and... Climate Innovation. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that. All right. Probably still need to get the letterhead set up. Katie Valenzuela, who has a undergrad and master's here in community development, has been many things over the years, circulating around the key themes of environmental justice, and is finishing her term as a city council member in the city of Sacramento, which is an amazing leadership role over the years. And Carolyn Abrams, who is here from Caltrans and was an undergrad, did a master's at another UCLA, and worked for many years with the Center for Regional Change, and we had the pleasure of working together. And I should say Katie was a leader in early on helping to launch the CRC, whatever it's been now, 18 years ago or something like that, which is pretty amazing. So with that, let's first just welcome our terrific guests. And I'm going to ask each of them to start kind of back in memory lane and give us just your recollections now of what attracted you to CRD in the first place. What was sort of the motivating force that got you into this program, and then we'll talk about the next steps along the way. Pass this along.
Hi all. First off, how many people actually knew what CRD was coming to UC Davis? Hands? Okay, I was in the same boat. I had no idea that this field existed, no idea about planning, urban development, and was told I needed one more class, I think my first or second quarter. This was the only class that fit my schedule. So I lucked out and I was blown away. I thought I was going to be a politician. I wanted to do poli-sci and was really drawn in by the amount of community-centered approaches in this first class and what the possibilities are for connecting back to community. Personally, I come from a community that had been redlined. Both my parents were activists in social movements, Chicano and indigenous social movements throughout the 60s and 70s, and we had this lived experience of planners, advocates, and I felt like they have been leading the charge in social justice movements, environmental justice movements, doing community planning work, and I was just putting a name to it. So I found my space at CRD and loved it, took another class, loved it, changed my major a couple years later, took me a while, and that's how I found my space here. I think there were a lot of awesome people to connect with that were doing different programs that were bringing a lot to this table, and I felt that the broadness of community regional development for me made sense because we're people, right? We're not just doing monolithic things, and we have all these needs. We want to be showing up holistically, and that's, to me, what CRD was bringing. I almost changed schools because I thought, no, I should do urban planning, and it was just too rigid for me, and I wanted to really stick with the community fabric of what CRD was offering.
Okay, that was beautiful, Amar. Yeah, I guess for me it's not too much memory lane. I actually graduated from the program in 2022, so still fairly fresh out of undergrad. Quite a similar story to you in many ways. I started at UC Davis as an international relations major. I was really interested in change and interested in climate change specifically, and felt like I'd be able to make a difference in international relations. And I took intro, IR1, and felt really stuck in a lot of ways. Working on such a big scale is great for some people, but for me it felt really limiting, and I wanted to work with people I love and make a difference in the places I could see. And similarly, I took CRD2 first. And for me, it was a really mind-blowing class in a lot of ways that helped me put together the dots. Learning about things like redlining, learning about things like racial covenants made me understand why our communities are the way they are. And it also kind of started to give me the tools to make change in a way I could really see. And that was really exciting to me. So I continued on, switched my major very quickly. And I think the thing I really enjoyed the most about CRD was I was allowed to really explore my interests in a pretty open-ended way. And secondarily, there's so many great mentors in the program. So I found mentorship with a professor that's no longer here, but he really helped me find my niche, which ended up being in climate adaptation. And it's been really exciting to continue the journey. I think a lot of people say you won't do what you graduated or what your major was, which may be true in some cases, but is absolutely not true for me. I feel like I apply the CRD curriculum every day in my work, and I'm really grateful for the program.
Well, good morning. Excuse my voice, lifelong asthmatic, going through some health things right now, but I'm excited to be back on campus today. I grew up in Kern County in a town called Oildale. Maybe you've heard of it. Most of you probably haven't. I came in as undeclared, but before I came to school, I started working when I was 13 years old doing community stuff. My dad was really active in the community, and I got voluntold to join a youth advisory committee when I was in middle school, and had just done that all through high school, organize food drives, volunteer in the community, be on student government. And so when I came to school, I really had no idea what I wanted to do, but I had one of those meddling moms who was going through the course catalog and was like, I found this course called Introduction to Community and I think you should take it. And I did, both because I was interested, but also because I needed money. And at the time there was a way you could get paid to take notes on campus. I don't know if we still do that, but you take notes. And so I had to meet with Bernadette Torello, who was the professor, would only let me do it if I met with her every week so we could talk about what the notes said and what was going on. And I think I maybe made it 3 or 4 weeks before I was like, this is what I want to do, because it's what I'd already been doing. And I didn't know you could get a career to do community stuff and to help communities solve problems and to help people, work together to make things happen. So I changed my major probably in the first half of the course and never looked back.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I'm Carolyn Abrams, and I use she, they pronouns. Very similar to everything that folks have already said. I came to UC Davis undeclared, and I really wasn't sure what I wanted to focus on. I feel like I had a sense or a feeling more of the essence of what I wanted to do, but not really a clear career path or a major that I could pursue. And I ended up taking CRD2 as my first CRD class. I believe that was the race and ethnicity in American communities. Okay, it's still the same class, good. And that just opened up a whole world of possibility for me. I didn't realize, similar to what Katie said, that I could have a career in social justice, and the expansiveness of this major was really appealing because it intersected with so many other facets of life, whether that's environmental justice, housing, community economic development, planning, all of these different realms and these intersecting areas where I wanted to make a change. And because it allowed for that expansiveness, I felt like I had so much opportunity with this major. And that at the same time, for many of you as undergrads, I think can feel perhaps a little overwhelming, but very quickly I was able to see a lot of the different career paths that were possible coming out of this major. And I think ultimately the experience here at UC Davis was phenomenal, and the faculty and just I use everything that I learned in this program on a day-to-day basis, and I feel very fortunate to be able to say that my career is directly related to what I studied in school.
Actually, keep it. We'll
Perfect.
So first off, that's amazing to hear all testimony. So maybe you could next, each of you talk about just the step before you are where you are now, but what were the steps kind of between when you graduated? What did you do in those sort of first couple of years to kind of launch your career? What did that look like for each of you? Yeah, why don't you start?
All right, so many things. So I finished this program in 2011. That was still very much at a time where we were feeling the impacts of the Great Recession. There were no jobs. So I knew I wanted to pursue a master's degree, and ultimately that would be really valuable in my career path. And so I figured, why not pursue that now rather than later, and see if I can come out of the graduate program with some more job opportunities. And so I spent a year in between undergrad and grad school, just working in for a youth development program. But ultimately, I pursued a master's in urban planning at UCLA. I was conflicted between pursuing a public policy degree and an urban planning degree, and ultimately figured that if I wanted to work in public policy, it would be more beneficial to have the very tangible skill set of an urban planner and understand how policy plays out on the ground. So for me, that was a really nice sequence following the community development program, a bit more focused and offered a lot more sort of technical skills, I think. So with community development as that foundation, urban planning then as like the more focused area, I finished that program and ultimately landed a job at the UC Davis Center for Regional Change, where I worked for the first 6 years of my career with Jonathan. And that was a really amazing opportunity to be exposed to a lot of the interdisciplinary work in this field. And again, the Research Center worked on so many different efforts that I was able to really hone the skills of policy-oriented research and community partnership and community advocacy. And we had the opportunity to work with everything from grassroots community organizations to state agencies, other research centers and institutes. And through that process, I think just having that opportunity to work on a lot of different disciplinary areas, it was incredibly fulfilling. I didn't want to just work on one thing, so the Center for Regional Change was a great opportunity for that.
Well, I finished undergrad in 2008, so it was an awful time to be like, I want to go out and work in nonprofits or government. So I stayed to do my master's as well. And honestly, even in 2010, as Caroline said, it wasn't looking too good. So I was applying everywhere. I was just on Idealist like every week, being like, okay, what jobs exist? I'm going to send resumes to everybody. I started 6 months before graduation. And actually, it was Jonathan who helped me because it was so hard to get through. And I'm sure you've had that if you applied for jobs, you send your resume and it's just in kind of a black hole. But he knew somebody at one of the jobs I applied to at Public Advocates and was able to kind of reach out to them and say, hey, one of my students is applying for this job. You should give her a chance. And it was a stretch position for me because they wanted 5 years of legislative experience and someone who was fluent in Spanish. And I was none of those things. But I had the passion, I had the interest, and so they took a chance, in part because of Jonathan's recommendation and in part because I was so passionate and I had the skill set. They knew I had studied abroad at CRD. They knew I had done all these field work practices. I'd done focus groups. I'd done interviews. They knew I had the base skills to do the work, which ended up being really helpful because I started in July in 2010, and the legislative calendar, if you're not familiar, runs on 2-year cycles, and there's this like last month of the 2-year cycle that's super busy, and so I got hired right before that last month. And on the first day of session, my boss called me from the emergency room. She's like, my appendix is burst. I'm going into surgery. Here's the password to my computer. Good luck. And I was like, whoop. So here's a statewide coalition of parents and students who were working with us on education policy, expecting me to represent them in the Capitol for the next 4 weeks. And it was rough. I'm not going to lie. I learned the hard way how things work and don't work at the Capitol. But again, it was those base skills I had of how to problem solve, how to work with people, how to reach out, how to operate in coalitions that got me through that. And I'm a stronger advocate for it, I think, although I would not recommend that being the way you learn to do policy. There's a lot of crying in the stairwells, just I don't know what I'm doing. We figured it out because CRD gave me that confidence of working with people, and in the end, that's what this is, right? It's working with people to make communities better. And so I figured it out, and yeah, the rest is history.
Okay, so yeah, like I said, I'm a little newer, so I would like to say that I'm still figuring it out in a lot of ways. But I remember really vividly, it must have been my 3rd or 4th year, I took a class and learned about the Governor's Office of Land Use and Climate Innovation / Office of Planning and Research, and all the things they do related to adaptation and resilience. And I was like, that is my long-term career goal. One day I will work there, and I'm gonna really build my career around working there. Luckily, my goal was met a lot easier than I expected, and I was hired right out of undergrad, so currently in the process of making a new goal. But I guess the story there is somewhat serendipitous, but very grateful for CRD for it, is I did an honors thesis my senior year, which I recommend to you all. And I wrote my honors thesis on something like extreme heat and community resilience in California, and submitted it as a writing sample to a random job at the Governor's Office of Planning and Research. I don't even remember what the job was, but they saw my senior thesis and thought I'd be a really good fit for the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience program. So I hopped over there, and I've been pretty much continuing my research I did in undergrad. I've been there for about 2 years. Similar to you, I joined about a week before a hiring freeze. So I joined on as the assistant planner without a manager and without anyone else on my team, and then found out that it would just be me. Luckily, I got a manager about 6 months later, and now I have a new team member. But I joined on at the age of 22 with about $100 million to give out to communities, and very little work experience. Literally $100 million. And they were like, all right, it's just you. Go for it. So likewise, a lot of tears. Luckily, I work from home, so they were in my bedroom. But it has been a crash course and a great learning experience. I think I came out a lot stronger for it. And now I'm kind of looking towards next steps on how to continue my career. I'm applying to grad school in city planning, applying to the UCLA program, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, similar to you all, kind of figuring out that path, but it's been a great start so far.
All right. I graduated 2005, so I'm dating myself, and I thought that I was going to be on this 5-year plan to graduate. Somebody told me when I started that most people take 5 years, so I was like, that's just what I'm going to do. I think my spring quarter of my 4th year, financial aid called me and was like, you know, you don't get 3 of these grants next year if you stay on, and you're going to have to come up with this money. I was like, all right, I'm going to graduate then. We'll figure that out. So I think the last 2 quarters and into the summer, I took 20 units, made it work. So it was kind of a blur. So graduating, I also had to work all 4 years, and so I did not really engage much in all the opportunities that were provided, and I think I missed out on some good connections and some of those opportunities. But at the same time, I had really awesome internships and advisors that I was placed in really awesome things. So I did work at the Capitol. I worked in a whole bunch of different spaces that were piquing my interest, housing, transportation. So when I graduated, I had a wealth of knowledge, but then also was like, what am I doing with my life? I have so much. How do I hone in? Where do I go? I landed a job working with the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation in affordable housing, and that was really fun. I had a really cool boss who also was never there, so I had to do a lot of work, and it was interesting having to go to these meetings, represent the city, represent corporations, do a lot of pro forma funding budgets that I had to figure out on my own. Google wasn't really active the way it is now, so it was a lot of like getting books and trying to like walk through someone else's templates. And then I did some community development work, and still trying to figure out what am I doing with my life. I have interests in all things, but need to hone it in. So I did go back to grad school. I went back east to a program that was also broad. It was community development and planning. And I had a really awesome professor there that was from the Bay Area, and she kind of was just like, why are you coming here to the middle of Massachusetts? Like, have you been here before? This is not California. This is not what you're used to. And if you come here, like, you've already done some of this, so how is this going to be beneficial? And so ended up going and worked with her. She helped kind of really challenge the process in a way that I wasn't familiar with, where we can say, hey, I'm interested in this, but I want to create my own coursework. I want to do my own work that makes sense for me and would serve communities that I'm interested in. And she helped kind of bridge that gap of challenging the process. And so I've been challenging the process ever since. She came back to California. I came back to California. We've been in great contact. And it's really been about how to increase like justice in the places that I've been in. How do we make sure community are not just at the table, but are leading the way, right? We don't want to just empower people. We want to co-power. We want to make sure that our communities see and live the power that is in them. And so I've lived that since I've been out of college, grad school, found my way into transportation, was there for a really long time. And again, got to challenge the process the whole time I was at Caltrans. Launched the Race and Equity Office at Caltrans, which was really fun and challenging, many tears through COVID. No budget, and now I'm at a place where I think is really cool. It's a place where I can really tap into the broadness of what community development, urban planning, all the things are. So I run multiple community investment programs that are really thinking about people as a whole, like how do we make sure that the most under-resourced, most climate-impacted communities have what they need to thrive, to succeed, whether that be food, transportation, shade, general funding, places to actually just live. So that's where I'm at today. I get to work with many of these folks, and I think this program, if you are here long enough, you start to see how much of a reach it has within your career and how we all actually play an integral part in the jobs that we take.
So you did a wonderful job, Amar, starting off the second question, which is what you do now. So I don't know if you want to add anything more, otherwise we can.
Yeah, so right now I'm at the California Strategic Growth Council. It's also an office of the governor connected to the Land Use Climate Innovation, or formerly Office of Planning and Research. We are a council derived of 10 appointed members. 7 of those are secretaries of state agencies within California. 3 of them are public members. And the goal here is to really create healthy, thriving communities for all. It was created back in 2008. It was part of large climate investment packages, AB 32, SB 32, all things where we started seeing everyone kind of do kind of their own expansion of what mitigating climate impacts were. And it was, how do we get these large state agencies to coordinate so that we're not just out here doing our own thing. So within my purview, I have 4 very large programs. It's about $1 billion a year in investments, all C's. So we have the Affordable Housing Sustainable Communities Program, the Transformative Climate Communities Program, Community Resilience Centers, and the Sustainable Agricultural Lands Conservation Program. These programs do a number of things. A lot of it is grading the type of opportunities there are to support communities, so housing and transportation, connectivity. The Transformative Climate Community is like block level funding, where you take like a 5 square mile radius and see how you can invest in that community, and it's really laden on community benefits agreements, community partnership structures. And then conservation, how do we think about conserving ag land? How do we support tribal lands in that conservation space? And so I have an opportunity to work with our transportation partners still, environmental partners, a lot of community to actually continue to iterate these programs. model these programs so that other agencies can also think about community benefits agreements in a way that they may have not been able to do in the past.
That was billion with a B.
Yeah.
Yeah, I, in my current job, get the lovely privilege to work with Amar, and I coordinate really closely with all of those grant programs, which is a lot of fun, and Amar is amazing, and I have a lot to learn from her. So I use those as examples in my own work, but I work, I guess for context, LCI is Land Use and Climate Innovation, and it's connected to the Strategic Growth Council. But within that, here's a lot of acronyms for you all. I work on the Integrated Climate Adaptation and Resiliency Program, which kind of does all sorts of climate adaptation coordination across the state. So that means grant programs for communities. It also means coordinating with different state agencies. And then it also means providing resources for communities. So if you've ever been online and seen the tool CalAdapt, it's like a data tool for climate adaptation. That's something that kind of is something we work with. What I do specifically, one more acronym for you all, is the Extreme Heat and Community Resilience Program, EHCRP, is where I work. And picking up my story, I joined about 2 years ago with $100 million to give away, and I've spent the past 2 years until yesterday, everyone. Thank you, I'm really excited. Standing up a new grant program for the state. So what that meant for me was I joined on and did a whole lot of community engagement. So we did online sessions, we went to community colleges across the state, we partnered with different state agencies and joined them on little road trips to talk to folks, both just regular people, community leaders, people from local governments, people from tribes, to understand how they were impacted by extreme heat, and then also what they want to do and what they're limited in doing because they don't have the funding. So that was a really cool way to start. And then I summarized all of that and made a bunch of grant guidelines, or like how to apply for a grant program, which basically gives funding to tribes, to community-based organizations, and to local governments to do all things related to extreme heat and community resilience. So like I said, we made our awards yesterday, which is very exciting. And extreme heat and community resilience means a lot of things. So for just a couple examples, it can mean physical infrastructure. Like in Reading, we just funded a new playground with all sorts of cooling things. So like splash pads and water fountains and shade structures. But extreme heat and community resilience can also mean social infrastructure. So we're doing things like working with community health workers in the Central Valley to do extreme heat education in farm worker communities. Or we're also working, or we will be working, in the Imperial Valley with a coalition of community groups that really want to come together to kind of make a community governance structure because they don't feel very supported by their local government and climate initiatives. So we're going to help people all across the state on these projects. And it's been a great opportunity to stand up this new grant program. But frankly, I'm pretty granted out at this point. So I'm moving over to kind of another side of the shop in a really exciting way. I'll be working on the California Extreme Heat Action Plan, which is a cool resource. Y'all should look it up. But it's basically kind of a guide of how all the different state agencies are going to work on extreme heat. And then I'll be working with all the agencies, seeing what did you do since it was last published, what are you still limited in doing, and then thinking further out, like how can we make this a guide for all sorts of communities? If someone looks up Extreme Heat Action Plan, how can this be helpful? And how can it work for state governments? How can it work for tribes? How can it work for local governments? So that's kind of my upcoming work and what I'm thinking about these days.
Well, I don't work for state government, but I do work for the people who advocated to create these programs. So it's cool to hear them talk about implementation when we got to advocate. So I've done a lot of things in my career. I mean, I've organized neighborhood associations. I've started new organizations, including Sacramento Community Land Trust, which just acquired its first parcel a few weeks ago. I've been in state policy. I have this interesting mix of like community organizing and state policy experience, and so I've been involved in a whole host of efforts and essentially right now I'm a consultant, and the fact that I just people hire me to be like, we want to, right now there's a group who wants to improve language access and voting because a lot of languages still don't get ballots in language, like Arabic communities, for instance. And so I'm going to help them figure out how to organize a policy campaign so that that law changes and that people can get ballots in language, right? So kind of the Swiss Army knife of social justice causes trying to make policy change. But in 2018, I'm a renter in the city of Sacramento, and we were fighting and organizing and fighting for tenant protections and affordable housing in the city of Sacramento. And people kept saying, this person's a problem, who happened to be my council member at the time. And finally, they're like, you should just, we need to find somebody to run for city council because it makes the organizing easier, right? When you have somebody who's in the seat who actually supports the issues. So I actually decided to run and took on an incumbent who had been in office for 8 years, who outspent me 6-1 and won. And we won in March 2020. So if you think back, roll back your clocks, 3 weeks before the shutdown. And so by the time I got sworn in December 2020, it was like, oh my God, like everything shut down. People lost jobs. We're trying to struggle with eviction protections and emergency rent assistance and just triage to keep people safe and figure out how to manage this pandemic in an equitable way. So it ended up I was in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. And we were incredibly effective. I mean, we passed ordinances to protect reproductive health care clinics. We opened the first ever city-run safe camping areas because the city of Sacramento had never done that before. We repealed racist laws that banned things like cruising and really took on Indigenous people's issues, missing and murdered Indigenous women, and a whole host of things, and really challenged the power structure. Because what I found is while you need 5 votes to win on a 9-body council, when you just have the platform. I remember right after I got elected, I got into a Twitter argument with somebody, and I swear 2 days later that Twitter argument was quoted in a Bee article at the Sacramento Bee, and I was like, oh, okay. Now people are going to listen to what I have to say a little differently. So using that platform was really great, but it did not come without sacrifices. I mean, they tried to recall me 3 times. They redistricted me, threw a bunch of money at me, and I ended up losing re-election by 116 votes in March. And so it's a fight that, the work we did was so incredible. And it's one of those things I always tell people about community development, because they're like, what is community development? I'm like, it's weird because it's not like I can give you a definite thing. And what I can tell you is that there's hundreds of us across this region and across this state doing this work, which is really cool because you get to meet with people at the agencies and you have that connection because you're from the same program. But it teaches you the skill sets that a lot of people don't have. When I first ran, we had this idea to go up to people and rather than pitch them on hey, you should vote for me, to be I'm going to ask you some questions, right? What are your needs? What are your priorities? What are the concerns you have with the city? And literally blew people's mind. I can't tell you the number of doors we went to. They're nobody's ever asked me this as well. And I'm when you come from community development, you're obviously, if I'm going to represent you, I need to ask you some questions about what your priorities are. But that stuff that community development makes really instinctual, that just makes you a more effective advocate and a more effective organizer of people. So now I'm going back into full-time consulting and really excited to dive back into that full role because being in public office is not for the faint of heart and it's been very tiring. But I'm just, community development was everything to my success in getting into office and the success in what we've been able to do. And again, it's so heartening now, 14, 15 years into my career, to hear people talking about extreme heat resilience grant programs and to know that our advocacy helped create those things. And so definitely, exciting for the future.
I wish I could say that you were my council member. like the next district over, but. So I currently work as the senior advisor on race and equity in the Caltrans Director's Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs. I had the privilege of being hired by Amar in the Office of Race and Equity back in 2021 when I first came to Caltrans. And so Caltrans is the California Department of Transportation. On paper, I'm a transportation planner, but I primarily do public policy work. And currently, so this office has seen many iterations. It is now, we merged with another office. They moved us into the director's office. They split us apart. They gave us a new deputy director and now a budget and all sorts of things. So all credit to Amar for getting that started. So currently the way that my position works is in our Office of Equity and Tribal Affairs, we have 2 branches. One is the Race and Equity branch and one is the Tribal Affairs branch. So I manage the race and equity branch, and there's a lot that falls under that umbrella, but two of the major things that I currently work on are the Caltrans Equity Index, which is a spatial mapping tool looking at transportation benefits and burdens. So if any of you are familiar with CalEnviroscreen or any of these other mapping tools, it's very similar, but it is at a very granular level so that folks can look at transportation burdens. So like if we're looking at traffic exposure or crash exposure, and then also the benefits of our transportation system. So do people have access to destinations, not only with a vehicle, but walking, biking, and with public transit. And then it covers a lot of demographics and things like that. So this tool, and again, I worked with Amar on this, so it's been in development for a long time. We launched it earlier this year, and I think it's going to be really pivotal in the way that Caltrans determines where it invests in, communities and the investments that those communities receive. So it's much more focused on looking at historically disadvantaged communities that have been harmed by our transportation system. And at this point in time, it's been launched, but we're now thinking through how do we actually integrate this into our policies and practices, and how is this resource utilized department-wide and also beyond Caltrans as well. So how can our other state agency partners use this tool? How can our local, like the MPOs or other transit agencies use it? Can other research centers and institutes apply this tool, things like that. So we're in the implementation phase of that. Another big focus of my work is co-leading the statewide Equity Advisory Committee, which is a partnership between Caltrans, the California Transportation Commission, and the California State Transportation Agency. And this is an external body. We actually just held our last meeting of the year yesterday. I was down in Riverside for that. And this is wrapping up 2 years of this advisory committee operating. This is a big shift in the way that these agencies have typically done business. And so this advisory group is a body of 15 members. These are all folks coming from different areas of the state, have advocacy backgrounds, they're equity experts in their own right, focused on a lot of different issue areas across the board with racial justice, environmental justice, housing, you name it, right? Transportation, all sorts of things. And so essentially this body has been established to provide advisory support to our state agencies. So we've been looking for ways to really partner with them and ensure that they are informing our policies, our practices, and other programs, whether that's how funding is spent, informing the Caltrans strategic investment strategy, looking at ways that our program guidelines, write in, community engagement, all sorts of things. So that's another big piece. It's been really amazing to work with that group. And I think the other bucket of things that fall under our office is kind of different in terms of it's sort of consulting, it's sort of advisory, but we often serve as advisors to the rest of the department and the different divisions throughout Caltrans. So if it's a social justice issue or a racial justice issue or anything having to do with equity, usually comes through our office. So we are frequently reviewing other plans and projects with that lens and sort of seen as the experts in the department to weigh in on that. So whether it's our public engagement plan or the California Transportation Plan or whatever it might be, folks bring things to us. And so it's a really incredible way to have a far-reaching impact on all of the different nooks and crannies throughout Caltrans. And then the other thing I'll highlight, which I find a lot of satisfaction in coming from my time at UC Davis and working for the Center for Regional Change, is that we also manage a lot of research projects. And so now I'm on the other side of those research projects where we are contracting with other universities and faculty to conduct research for Caltrans, but we often will get to put forward research proposals that are then selected, and then we find faculty that we can work with to pursue those research topics. And ideally, what I do is once we get the results of those research studies and the findings, it's about implementing those findings. Whereas previously, we were the ones conducting the research for the state agencies and hoping, please use this research, please take our recommendations. So that's been really wonderful. I think two of the projects that we're currently working on, which I'll highlight just because I think it speaks to the the wide scope of what we do at Caltrans and in this office. One is focused on reconnecting communities, and we're researching promising practices around land back for Indigenous communities and looking at ways in which we can set aside or relinquish essentially surplus land that Caltrans owns. That's part of their right-of-way. And with that, are there mechanisms that we can put this back, whether it's to other community land trusts or have like the first right of refusal for Indigenous groups or other folks that have been displaced by our transportation system. So that's one project. And then another one that just wrapped up was looking at whether or not, we could kind of quantify community engagement in the sense of, if we're going to engage with communities, is there a way that we can measure and track whether that engagement is impactful and meaningful and whether we are reaching the communities that we're trying to reach. So that just kind of gives you a sense of the different research that we're doing, projects that come through our office, and I think it's quite a mixed bag of research, policy, planning, and sort of advisory support.
All right, well, you can kind of hear an ecosystem of the different interconnections of grassroots to one agency connecting with another agency, connecting to communities. So we have just a little bit of time for questions. So please share your questions, thoughts about anything they offered or anything else on your mind. Looks like we have one in the back.
I guess I'm curious, where can we learn more about the Carolyn? Where can we learn more about the Caltrans land back?
Great question. So maybe I can send you some links after this class for folks to have access to. That research study is still under development, so there probably isn't much posted on our website right now, but I could direct you to our division of research. And usually we list all of our research projects there, and if research projects have concluded, the findings or the reports or whatever are also included on that website. So I'll make a note and I can send that to you.
I can also add, there's some really awesome, again, advocates in this space that have worked with legislators to help state agencies actually do some of this work. So some of the land back came from initial legislation on first actually citing how much property the state owns, state agencies own. And that was in 2020, 2019, where each state agency had to do a massive scan and identify parcels on what they could relinquish, like what's not being used. Had to be redone because of COVID, right? There was a lot of then buildings left open. New legislation came in from Assemblymember Ramos that allowed tribes to have that first right of refusal to those parcels, but they were not included in initial legislation that would give them that right to actually procure that land. And so from those spaces, I think it's also new legislation that came out, which is starting to come to fruition on renaming harmful sites. So all of this kind of interplaying with the type of work that we get to do with, we now have statutory requirements to identify these things and now put them in action. And I think what Carolyn is saying is how we engage with our research institutions helps validate how we do that when we're on the internal side. So working that internal, external strategies, validating it with research, that's giving us a lot more data and credit to actually do some of this work. So lots of renaming legislation that you can look up, lots of land back relinquishment legislation. You can Google up north, one of the first state publicly recognized land back legislation pieces came in where there was a conglomerate of tribes that came together to form an LLC where the state gave back, I think, over 1,000 acres to tribes up north and have ownership, where the state is still actually tapped with the requirement of maintenance on that property for the tribes so that the tribes aren't then taxed and hammered with all these other punitive things that they would have to do.
We have time for one more. Oh, where are we? Over here. Yes, please.
I was just curious if you guys find a lot of use with your masters, or if you could go back when you not get a master's and you're just trying to find a job straight out of undergrad.
I can start. coming out of undergrad, I did land some really good jobs. They were really well-paying jobs, but I was doing an internal struggle of, do I want to keep learning? Do I want to stay in this? So for me, it was beneficial to go back to grad school, make some awesome connections. I graduated during the recession, so there were no jobs when I came out. So I was really questioning my life choices at that point with some massive debt. But I will say I did find my purpose in grad school. Like for me, I really wanted to put a name to some of the ideas I had, and I really found that love with interconnectivity of planning, and it was through transportation. So that's where I had a good base of my career. All of us have to move and go somewhere and access things, and so that was where I found in grad school it made sense, especially connecting the dots to geography and GIS and how that plays into the work. So it was something that benefited me personally, financially. Challenging, but hey, I'm grateful for it.
So I'm sorry, we have to end because people are, you remember when you were students, right? At the time, start rustling and then you gotta go. So, but if you can hang out here, maybe a little bit, people have other questions afterwards. So big round of applause.